Ivan the Terrible executed his own heir in a fit of rage, but the strangest part is what he did immediately after the fatal blow. One moment in November 1581, he swung that heavy metal-tipped staff with the same fury he used on enemies. The next, he dropped to the floor, panicking, screaming for doctors, cradling the son he'd just killed. A czar who ordered massacres without blinking, suddenly terrified of what he'd done. The contradiction says everything about him. A man whose violence reshaped Russia. A man whose victims weren't statistics. They were people caught under a ruler, spiraling. And that spiral? It started years earlier, with the institution he built for terror. Number 1. The Tsar who invented his own secret police. Why would a ruler create an entirely separate country inside his own? Because in 1565, Ivan decided paranoia needed a zip code, and uniforms, and a vibe straight out of a medieval biker gang. He called it the Oprichnina, a state within a state carved out by decree, patrolled by his hand-picked enforcers who dressed in black, rode black horses, and strapped actual dog heads and brooms to their saddles. Yes, dog heads, rotting, snarling symbols of sniffing out treason and sweeping it away. Very subtle, very wellness influencer energy, if wellness influencers were armed sadists. These guys operated with near total freedom, seizing land, torturing nobles, and turning everyday fear into public policy. And here's the part that would make any economist faceplant. Ivan claimed this whole setup would purify Russia, yet the regions under Oprichnina control became unstable, depopulated, and financially useless. Tax revenue tanked, trade collapsed, but to Ivan, the optics of loyalty tests mattered more than keeping the lights on. And the pattern begins to emerge. He manufactured threats just so he could feel justified crushing them. That paranoia, it wasn't just institutional. It lived inside him, twisting every impulse into policy. Which is exactly where things start to get even stranger. Number 2, he believed his fits of rage were divine messages. You'd think a man running an empire would try to control his emotions. Ivan did the opposite. He treated every mood swing like a memo from heaven. Courtiers in the 1570s recorded these sudden, explosion-short, violent bursts that came without warning. Chronicler Ivan Timofeyev flat out called them storms without warning, which is a very poetic way of saying the Tsar could go from quiet to skull-cracking fury faster than a glitchy video game boss. And after each outburst, Ivan claimed the rage wasn't his fault. It was heavenly inspiration. Divine Wi-Fi apparently, with all the buffering issues but none of the accountability. The irony gets thick. This was a ruler who constantly weaponized religion, yet he accused priests of treason anytime they hinted politely that maybe God didn't endorse random beatings. Imagine telling your therapist your tantrums are angel approved. That's the level we're working with here. Modern observers would call this untreated mental illness, maybe bipolar cycles, maybe neurological damage. Whatever the cause, Ivan treated each impulse like state policy. Dangerous stuff when you're holding an empire by the throat. And those impulses didn't just end careers, they reshaped Russia's future. Next comes the part where his inner storms start wrecking the entire economy. Number 3, he destroyed his own economy by accident. How does a ruler manage to wreck the financial system he depends on to stay in power? Ivan found a way, and he didn't even mean to do it. During the late 1560s, while the Oprichnina was in full swing, Ivan started forcibly relocating entire noble families, confiscating their estates and carving up land like he was rearranging furniture during a nervous breakdown. The problem was simple. Those nobles actually knew how to run things. Farms, towns, supply chains, all the boring stuff that keeps a country alive. When Ivan tore these networks apart, regions like Novgorod, once major economic engines, turned into wastelands. Tax revenue collapsed by up to 1/3. 1/3. Imagine your paycheck suddenly missing 30% because your boss fired everyone competent and replaced them with dudes in black robes carrying dog heads. That was Russia under Ivan. And the irony? The same man who obsessed over micromanaging court rituals didn't bother paying attention to the agricultural implosion he personally triggered. He was too busy hunting imaginary traitors to notice real famine creeping in. But if you think economic collapse is bad, wait until you see what happened when one forged rumor convinced him that an entire city was plotting against him. Number 4, the Novgorod massacre was driven by a rumor. Imagine an entire city being sentenced to death because of a single letter, a letter that wasn't even real. That's where we're heading. Ivan's paranoia finally reached supernova levels in 1570 when someone handed him a forged document statement claiming Novgorod planned to defect to Poland. No investigation, no pause, just instant apocalyptic fury. And the Oprichniki, already primed for violence, mobilized like they've been waiting for this excuse all year. What followed was one of the bleakest episodes in Russian history. Eyewitness Heinrich von Staden described victims with their hands tied, shoved through holes cut in the frozen Volkhov River. Thousands drowned under sheets of ice. Families torn apart, entire districts burned, all because Ivan believed a rumor that wouldn't survive a 2-minute fact check today. And here's the part that hits hardest. There was zero evidence. None. A megaphone monarchy took one whisper and turned it into mass killing. Real human beings died because one man's fear drowned out everything else. This massacre didn't just scar Novgorod. It showed how quickly Ivan's suspicions could become national nightmares. And those nightmares weren't limited to politics. His private life, somehow even stranger. Number 5, he collected exotic animals and enjoyed watching them tear each other apart. You're probably thinking the political violence was the worst of it. But wait, Ivan's hobbies were messed up too. Foreign envoys who visited the Kremlin described something most courts would brag about: a private menagerie filled with exotic animals, lions, bears, big-ticket creatures that required serious money and upkeep. But Ivan didn't keep them for admiration or prestige. He used them for entertainment, the way some people use Friday night reality TV, except his version involved staged animal fights, described in detail by English diplomat Giles Fletcher, who was clearly trying not to sound horrified in his report. Picture this: courtiers standing awkwardly in a courtyard while Ivan, wearing layers of velvet and jewels, laughs as two terrified animals are forced to rip each other apart. This is the same guy who demanded ritual piety, strict church attendance, and moral discipline from everyone around him. Very pray on Sunday, blood sport on Monday energy. The irony is almost absurd. And remember, these weren't cartoon villains or NPCs in a medieval video game. They were living creatures trapped in the orbit of a ruler who saw violence as spectacle, whether the victims were nobles, towns, or animals. But beneath all that bravado, Ivan had a soft spot: his own fear. More specifically, his obsession with being poisoned. Number 6, he was terrified of poison, yet poisoned others constantly. No ruler in Russian history spent more time obsessing over poison than the man who weaponized it like a hobby. Ivan lived like every meal might be his last. He refused to eat food prepared outside his line of sight. He rotated cooks so often, the Kremlin kitchen probably felt like a reality show elimination round. He even used a personal silver dining set because he believed the metal could detect toxins. Spoiler, it couldn't. But when you're Ivan, superstition counts as science. And while he guarded his own dinner like it was a priceless relic, he tossed around poison accusations like confetti. Nobles such as Prince Vladimir of Staritsa were executed for supposedly plotting with toxins, sometimes after being forced to drink the very substances they were accused of using. I know how unhinged that sounds. The dark twist: these precautions didn't protect Ivan's own family. His heir's pregnant wife was poisoned, allegedly under Ivan's orders, because he didn't approve of how she dressed. That's the level of paranoia we're dealing with. Fear feeding violence, violence feeding fear. And when that paranoia met military strategy, the results were catastrophic. Number 7, his biggest military failure was self-inflicted. Why would a ruler launch a massive war, then fire the very people capable of winning it? That's the puzzle waiting here. The Livonian War dragged on for 25 exhausting years, starting in 1558, and at its height, Russia threw around 150,000 troops into the meat grinder. That's a lot of boots, horses, and rubles marching toward a goal Ivan couldn't even articulate clearly by the end. But the real disaster wasn't the enemy. It was Ivan's obsession with loyalty tests. He purged seasoned commanders, executed competent officers, and stuffed leadership roles with people who survived mainly because they nodded at the right moments. Imagine playing a strategy game where you delete your best units mid-battle because you think they're judging you. That was Ivan's vibe. And the irony bites hard: a ruler desperate to glorify his empire ended up weakening it more than any foreign army could. By the late 1570s, Russia was bleeding cash, manpower, and morale. Villages were empty, supply lines broke, soldiers deserted in droves. The war sputtered out not with victory, but with exhaustion. And all that pressure, all that spiraling instability was leading him straight toward the darkest, most personal catastrophe of his entire life. Number 8. He killed his own son and immediately tried to save him. You're probably bracing yourself here because what comes next is the moment people think they know about Ivan, but the real version is somehow worse and stranger and heartbreakingly human in all the wrong ways. In November 1581, during yet another argument about military campaigns, because of course that's what set him off, Ivan snapped. He grabbed his heavy metal-tipped staff, the same one he used as both walking stick and weapon, and struck his son, Tsarevich Ivan Ivanovich, across the head. Witnesses said the blow cracked the skull. One strike, a lifetime of rage focused into a single fatal moment. And instantly, the facade shattered. The Tsar who burned cities and ordered mass drownings dropped to the floor screaming for doctors. He cradled his dying son for hours, rocking back and forth, begging him to hold on. Blood on the floor, panic in his voice. The ultimate autocrat reduced to a terrified father watching the consequences of his own temper unfold in real time. It wasn't mythic tragedy. It was preventable, stupid, brutal, human. And after that moment, something in him broke, sending him spiraling into the eeriest final chapter of his life. Number 9. He became terrified of death just as his violence peaked. Let's raise the stakes here because what Ivan does next makes his earlier paranoia look almost mild. As his brutality reached its absolute peak, he suddenly became terrified of dying. Not just nervous, obsessed. In his final years, Ivan hoarded holy relics like he was speedrunning salvation. He dragged priests into confession sessions that lasted hours, forcing them to write down every sin he could remember. Murders, tortures, betrayals, page after page, as if paperwork could outsmart judgment. Clerics described him pacing, sweating, ranting about demons waiting for him. This from the same man who once claimed his violent impulses were heavenly inspiration. And then came his will. He rewrote it constantly, convinced enemies would desecrate his corpse the moment he died. He ordered guards for his tomb before he was even in it. Imagine living a life so drenched in blood that you genuinely believe your afterlife is a pending court case. The irony is brutal. Ivan spent decades ruling through terror only to end up consumed by the very fear he inflicted on everyone else. And that fear carried him straight into one of the strangest final moments of any ruler in history. Number 10. His death was almost comically undignified. You think Ivan's story can't get any weirder? Here's a teaser. His final moment involved chess, bragging, and possibly mercury poisoning. On March 18, 1584, Ivan was in his private chambers preparing for a chess match. Not a war council, not a prayer vigil, a casual game. Witnesses said he was in a strangely good mood, even boasting about plans for yet another marriage, his 7th. Very 58-year-old king acting like a teenager who just discovered dating apps. Then, right as he was settling onto the couch, he collapsed. No dramatic speech, no final curse, just gone. His attendants freaked, but the Tsar who survived conspiracies, invasions, and his own self-inflicted chaos died mid-chess like a guy losing a match to gravity. Later examinations of his remains revealed high levels of mercury. And the wild part? It probably came from the medicines he took constantly, tonics, ointments, alchemical treatments that promised health while quietly wrecking his body from the inside out. Very on brand for a ruler who caused his own disasters without realizing it. A man obsessed with control, undone by his own habits in a quiet room. And that final pathetic collapse sets the stage for one last reflection. What his contradictions reveal about the era he shaped. You're probably trying to make sense of all this, right? Because after 10 chapters of chaos, cruelty, and whiplash-level contradictions, Ivan still doesn't fit into a neat box. The image we opened with, Ivan cradling the son he had just killed, tells the whole story better than any title ever could. A ruler who could annihilate cities without blinking, suddenly reduced to panic by his own violence. That contradiction wasn't an exception, it was the pattern. His paranoia built the oprichnina. His mood swings justified massacres. His obsessions wrecked his armies, his economy, and eventually his family. Russia didn't just endure a violent ruler. It endured a man who couldn't control himself, yet controlled an entire state. And in a way, that's what makes this history feel disturbingly modern. One unstable person with absolute power can warp an entire nation's fate. Real people paid the price for his spirals, not abstract subjects, families, towns, whole regions. So if one of these facts caught you off guard, or if there's another historical figure whose reputation hides contradictions this wild, drop it in the comments. Someone out there probably has no idea how bizarre their favorite famous villain actually was.